This message is not one of peace, even though I'm not saying this with hostility. But because it's not about peace, I'm going to skip the peace greeting this time. We're going to hear, men, brothers, we're going to hear about colorism from black women for reasons that I've mentioned before. Projection, the refusal to take accountability. But we're also going to hear about it for one reason that is a good reason. And the reason that we're going to hear about the colorism that is a good reason is that we are a generation that sat up and said to darker skinned kids, you black, you crusty, you nappy headed, you burnt, you crunchy, and we got away with it. As kids, we said this, both genders said this to ourselves and to each other, and we got away with it, and it was considered to be okay. And we're going to hear about this. Now that we are adults, we are the adults who got away with saying it as kids, and we're going to hear from those who heard this. We're going to hear from those who did not fight back, who did not say anything back when they were younger. When we got older, a lot of us had to outgrow this, especially those of us males. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to hear some of the backlash from when we were younger. But this also does not mean that we have to remain silent about what we heard coming from them. We created the militancy that Rashida Strober now has. That was us. When I say we, I mean black people in general did it. Black men and black women created that militancy. Many of us are appalled by what she would, by double standards that she will openly tout and promote and say are okay, even though they're double standards. That it's okay for her to weaponize her light-skinned boyfriend just to tick off the people she's talking to. But it is not okay for someone to say, that's my dark-skinned girlfriend, my dark-skinned wife. Well, you know what? Let's be honest. The world is colorist. And one of the things we do want to give the anti-colorism, or one of the things we want to give the colorism crybabies credit for, is that they are addressing a global issue. I know I'm now standing here in a country that is colorist. It is not violent. It is not hateful. It is not, it's not racist like America, but it is still a colorist nation. These are people who are our grandchildren. They're just East Africans who've been living outside of the tropics for a few tens of thousands of years since the last ice age, and they lost a bit of melanin. And at some point, for whatever reason, and the melanin loss apparently was more recent, and for whatever reason, nowadays, they will breed themselves to lose even more melanin. I kid you not. Will they make fun of somebody that's too pale, that's too white? Yes, especially if it's a male. Does this sound familiar, black people? But I'm standing here in a country that is colorist, with no hatred, with no rancor, yet I'm the only one here that will talk against it. Now, there's a few people that may have something to say against it in bigger cities, and I don't know who they are. I've never met them. But outside of these large cities, nobody except me, yours truly, will talk against this kind of thing. I'm the only one that'll do it. Just like Rashida Strober she was the one that started dark skin activism as far as she knows. Now, there are probably some who came before her, but I don't think she's lying when she says that she started dark skin activism, because she may really not know about the ones that preceded her. I don't know anybody that focused on it the way she did. So I can't call any names like that. But we did. We're going to have to admit to one thing, and that is that we as a black community, not we as black men, but we as a black community, perpetuated this stuff in childhood. I have admitted before that we black men don't perpetuate it in adulthood. That's not what we're doing. I have admitted that actually when we get older, we're more likely to continue to face colorism. It is the light-skinned men that know they're facing it, because while if you're a chocolate brother and they like chocolate, they may not necessarily say, "Ooh, chocolate." They may not say that because hell, they don't have to approach you anyway. They don't have to come up with a line for you. But if you are not, if you're butterscotch, if you're pale, they will tell you, "You ain't my type. I like them dark." They'll say it. So we know that this is going on, and we're not supposed to say anything about it. So I admit that therein lies a double standard. Paler men are not supposed to say anything about this. We're supposed to fuck the shuck up and take it. In exchange for all those decades and even centuries in which we were the preferred lot. Even though the ones my age saw that change and reverse right when we were old enough to be selected by black women. Even though that's our generation, we're supposed to fuck the shuck up because of the previous generations of us that got it, that benefited. But I'm going to say that I'm talking about as a community, we will need to admit that we created that militancy. And we need to admit that the colorism crybabies are right about the global aspect of colorism. There is their legitimate grievance. But they cannot come to us and say that we as grown adult black men perpetuated this colorism. They cannot come to us and say that. They can say that this ignorant nigga over here did, with no education, still living with his mama. I don't want no black bitch. They can say that about them. But they can't say that about the mass of black men, especially educated adult black men, perpetuating colorism. And we need to point this out to them and say, well, you know, the ones who have the education you want a man to have and who are productive like you want a man to be, or at least like you say you want a man to be, are not the ones that are perpetuating it. They're not doing this. The ones that are perpetuating it, they're over there. They're actually in their mama's house. They're actually riding the bike to their little grocery store job and then going back home to mama. Those are the ones still stuck on stuff like that. That's really what's happening. Dope boys, I don't know. I don't hang around a lot of dope boys, and I never did. Maybe they're still stuck on that. But a lot of them are hearing something from their childhood. They're still hearing it in their heads, and they're responding to that because they didn't get to respond when they were younger. That part is our fault and theirs. But now when it comes to globally, we need to admit, I'm over here. I'm abroad from you. I'm in a time zone of anywhere between 8 to 11 hours ahead of you if you're listening in the United States. And I can tell you that, yes, this is real. This is serious. It is not violent, and at least not in the Middle East. It's not necessarily dangerous in many cases, but it's here, and it's in the bedroom specifically. Would you lose a job because you're dark? No. Would you not get a job because you're dark? No. Would you have a more difficult time getting married because you're dark? If you're a man or a woman, you can face that. If you're a woman, you definitely will. You will face that if you are a woman. And dark here would be considered in the middle or light skin among most of us, even in the U.S., even in the Midwest, even in California. Yeah, even in Canada. Yeah, it's like that. That's what it's like. Globally speaking, it is a trend. See, when I was in Malaysia and I saw something with skin bleach, I asked my buddy, hey man, and I held it up to him and I said, say bro, is there anything the opposite of this that sells here? And he said, no, nobody would buy that. Everyone wants to look like you. Funny thing is, he and I are about the same shade. We were that day. A week later, after I returned from Langkawi, then I was closer to my wife's shade. He wasn't even quite sure who I was when he picked me up from the airport. It was when my wife walked out behind me. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's you. But when I first landed in the capital, and I hadn't laid out in the sun yet, Yeah, he had to ask. I had to ask him the question, and he had to answer. And he was like, everybody know, they want to look like you. And the thing I noticed there was that, you see, even among the Malay women, although the Malay people in general are darker, they're in between the average shade of an Indian and the complexion of a Chinese person. Nonetheless, I began to notice that the Malay women, oh, they wore the hijab, but they were pale. They weren't even the same color as their men. I began to pick up on this. And I was like, okay, I only know the women from the hijab or the lack of it, and which man they're with. I don't know anything else, and maybe which language they're speaking. Otherwise I can't tell the difference between the Malay woman and the Chinese woman. But the men, I can tell the difference. And then I saw the skin bleach. And then I had to ask him that. It is here. It is there. It is abroad. And if the colorism crybabies are going to address the global aspect of it, let's get on board with them 100%. Let's go and call every other race of people out and say to them, look, we fighting this thing. What the F is wrong with you? We resisted this colonization of the mind. You didn't. What's wrong with you? Call the Arabs out. As much as I love the Malay people because they've just been sweet and kind to everybody, you can call them out on this too, although they probably deserve to be treated a little more nicely. The Cambodians, you don't have to call out. It's not an issue in Cambodia. I don't know this from myself. I know this from a white dude who liked to go to Cambodia because they didn't use skin bleach. Yeah, ironic, right? But let's go ahead and call this stuff out. Let's not treat it with kid gloves. Colorism is offensive. It is an insult, and let's take it like one. But we need to see, the thing is, we as black folks are dealing with it now at this point, and we as black adult men with any kind of education aren't even allowed to perpetuate it socially. We know this. Let's start dealing with the actual things that other people have done, and how insulting they have been, as they're willing to insult themselves just to compliment the ones that have oppressed everybody. And in order to be fair, I was listening to Mr. Fantastic's dark skin delegation. I didn't get to the last hour, but I heard when Maurice called in and told his story. And Maurice did not say dark skinned women, he said black women. And he told his story about how Patrice broke his heart. He was in love with her. He wasn't trying to hit that even. And then she went with a drug dealer and got pregnant, left him for a drug dealer and got pregnant. And he's like, I just want to know why they do it. And what happened? Not one sister sat up and said on that panel, not one of them said, well, at least let me theorize as to why this does happen. So Rashida was the one that actually dealt with him like a person calling in with an issue and a question. She didn't answer it, but she is at least polite. The other sister, I don't know who she was, you could hear the neck roll and the eye roll and the finger snap in her voice. I call bullshit. Didn't even consider the possibility of what he was saying. And they were trying to address what he was saying as though it was a bias against dark-skinned women. He said black women. And I know this to be the case. Doesn't matter when they're pale. It doesn't matter when they're chocolate. It doesn't matter when they're rich or when they're poor. When they're ratchet or when they're nerdy, they are practicing dysgenic mating standards. This goes beyond colorism. It goes into colorism that they practice towards us. That does happen. Stereotypes towards us. I mean, he identified himself as a light-skinned man. Yeah, he's going to catch it. That's a case where a woman liked him, at least seemed to like him. But then she was able to get with a negative stereotype who was more in line with what a nigger is supposed to be, according to white folk stereotypes. And even if she liked Maurice, she still wanted the social capital as well as the money that came with being with this guy. That's what it was. And Maurice could be a good athlete, a promising student who's not going to get arrested and go to jail except on a freak accident, which could still happen. But, I mean, there's certainly, I put it like this. It could happen to him, but you got enough guilty brothers around to start falling before, to be the canary in the coal mine, right? Right? You see what I'm saying? And she's willing to pass up that the man for the canary in the coal mine, the one that's actually guilty. Because what does she want? She wants a man that one day is in prison. Gives her credibility. Patrice was in college, y'all. Keep this in mind. I know this dude. Y'all, it is 29 degrees out here, and I'm watching a man with nothing more. I wish I'd put this on camera. I'm watching a young boy walk to school with nothing more than what you would wear in the spring. And it's 29 degrees Fahrenheit. See, that's why I say these people, these folks I live with, that's part of why I say sometimes they are white folks. They're willing to freeze. They're willing to, they want to go to Switzerland in the winter and use skin bleach, not the men, but the women. And they want to breed themselves to be as light as possible, even when they don't hate us. Funny thing is the women that here, the women actually want to get with black men. They may not want to marry them, but they want to get with them. So here we are somewhat fetishized. And I'm glad they got rules against fornication, because they will be trying to fornicate with these brothers. So we are dealing with a worldwide colorism. And our issue is not really much different from others. They see black skin as being more masculine over here where I am. Light skin as being more feminine. And I've seen with my own two eyes that the palest men here may be the most aggressive, because they gotta be, but they don't have a conversation about this as often. They don't even examine their own subconscious mind, so they don't have a conversation. This is all happening at the subconscious level, and they're not aware of it. If I wasn't African American from a community that talks about this, I wouldn't even know what I was looking at. We got to be honest with each other. We're being very dishonest in many cases, and we're missing something else. Now, some of you would say, well, see, black, why do you care about over there? You need to, why don't you care about what's happening in the black countries? Well, this at one point was a black country, and it wasn't really even that long ago. Wasn't that doggone long ago? No, it was not. So I want y'all to keep this in mind, that it's worth it to fight on a global scale, and it's worth it to tell other groups of people our relationship with you is based on your attitude towards not only us personally, but also your attitude towards us phenotypically. You ain't got to want to marry us, but you can't sit up here and say that because we're dark, we're uglier, or because we got dominant noses and dominant lips and 4C hair, that these things automatically make us ugly. This is not something you're allowed to say in your mind. That white is, you definitely are not allowed to say that white is better. See, when people prefer themselves over us, that's not really a sign that they're brainwashed. It is when they specifically prefer white over themselves and prefer us least to anyone, even just in terms of beauty contests, that you know they're brainwashed. And you say to them, your level of brainwashing and your resistance to it will determine your relationship with us as a race. And we need to be on code about that. And that's when you start to find out who's actually willing to change and who's not. And these Arabs ain't. You got to dominate them for them to change. And that's why I tell you, you can teach them, you can work with them, do business, you can have them as personal friends. But we can't expect any kind of alliance from them as a whole. They're not even allied with each other. That also sounds very familiar. But we're actually allying ourselves with each other and at least talking about these issues before they are. And that's why I'm contributing to this by giving you this outside knowledge. So, we need to get our facts straight, and we don't need to continue the conversation about colorism without factoring these things in anymore. We, as a community, traumatized each other in childhood. That's the first thing, both genders. As adults, black men were not allowed to continue this on in any educated circles. That's the second thing. Third thing, the colorism crybabies are in fact correct about the global nature of colorism, and that is an insult to both of us. And we all have every right and even a duty to fight people based on that. All of us do. So, these are the three main points that we need to factor in from now on when we discuss colorism. And if you say these points and remind somebody of them and they want to just, dismiss them, that's when you say there's no reason to talk. Maurice should have hung up. Maurice, if you hear this, feel free to reach out to me. but they weren't going to be able to help you. Rashida meant to, but she even got cut off. I mean, she was actually polite about it. The most militant, dark-skinned activist on there was polite about what Maurice was talking about. Somebody else, I don't know who it was, I call bullshit. You just want to justify going to all these other. Look, sisters need to understand something. You ain't choosing, and they are. BGS said it. In California, why brothers with these Latinas so much? Because the Latinas are choosing them. You want to sit back and wait on a man to come to you after he done already been told no by a whole bunch of others of you beforehand. And you want to come up with every reason why you will not do what Maria will do. And Maria will walk up, how you doing? What's that? You are cute. I mean, come on now. You want to talk about competition. You want us to compete for you. You ain't willing to compete for Junebug and Shine, but you willing to compete, though, for Thuggo. You willing to compete for D-Boy. And that's where the hypocrisy comes in. And even though personally, many of you are going to say, well, I don't compete for neither one of them. Personally, many of you are going to say exactly that. But the thing is that in real life, there are enough who are willing to compete for D-Boy. Enough of them out there willing to compete for D-Boy to where he ain't got to compete for you. And yet there ain't no sister out there trying to compete for the normal brothers. They are not out there unless they're big as a house or got a bunch of other guys' kids. 3 kids with 5 baby daddies. In that case, then they're willing to compete. And what you sitting up and saying is, he wrong because he went out with Maria, but Maria walked up and asked him, and she was cute and wasn't bringing other people's kids to the table in the first place. He out there with Mei Ling. Well, Mei Ling was cute and showed interest and did not bring other people's kids to the table. That's what the difference was. That's what changed it. That's why this is happening. I've said this before, brothers who prefer chocolate sisters will still wind up with somebody else. Why? Because these somebody else's will walk up to them, show them interest, choosing signals. That's why. You know, the one time I was actually asked out by someone that was quite attractive, asked out. This happened 2 times. My son's mother, but she had a child by that point. But it was only one time in my life I was asked out by a woman that was attractive and did not have somebody else's kids. She was Vietnamese American. It's the only time that ever happened. The only time. I want y'all to stop and think about that for a second. Now, I've been flirted with before, not necessarily asked out, but I've been somewhat flirted with before when they were attractive. It was the only time that they were not playing mind games, and I know for a fact, was when they were not sisters. The sisters are saying, well, you need to compete. He's in the gym. Of course, I'm gonna be early for the date with him and stand you up because he's in the gym all the time. You're not competing. You're not competing, sister. That's what's happening. Don't nobody here hate you because you black. You're not competing. You're bragging about the fact that you don't compete. You revel in this. You don't compete. And then boast about this, about what you ain't gonna do to get no man to other women, and then you wind up by yourself, and Mei Ling can choose between Donald Ling and Junebug. Hell, this thing keeps going on. I mean, y'all lucky I found the sister I did, but she ain't from the States. But I can honestly say this, though. She never pursued no other man. Even though I met her as an adult, I can talk about her whole adult life because I was able to check that out and check into it. She did not pursue anyone else. She may have liked someone. She did discuss marriage before either of us knew the other one existed. But she didn't go pursuing someone else, then turn around and tell me I never walk up to a man, I never pursue a man. Yeah, she ain't tell me that. That's what happens with sisters. I don't never make the first move, and lo and behold, find out later, especially in my own hometown, find out later they made some first moves. You know, that's the game. And that's what's driving brothers away. It ain't your 4C hair. It ain't your nose, it ain't your lips, it ain't your melanin. What's driving brothers away is the attitude and the damn lying, the gaslighting. Brothers ain't gaslighting y'all about colorism. As adults, we really don't see how we could continue doing that. We're thinking you're talking about adulthood because that's our mindset. You're talking about what's happened in childhood, and that's where the disconnect happens. We're not gaslighting you as a whole. Now, kids might do that, but we ain't gaslighting you as adults about that. We're really on two different wavelengths talking about two different times. Yeah, we're talking about the same timeline, but different years in the timeline. So we ain't gaslighting you. That's not what's going on. Brothers are being stereotyped. When they're adults, they're being stereotyped by women old enough to be adults. And that's not actually happening when these brothers step out. That's not what's going on. I remember being in the subway and a local woman here. I live in a conservative Gulf country. I was in the subway and a local woman here with her brother heard me talking in English to the guy behind the counter because he was an English speaker. And she started talking. She started up a conversation, and that could have got me in trouble. She did this with her brother standing next to her. I was polite, but I wasn't going to talk too long. She's like, "Where did you learn English from? Your English is excellent." I was like, "Well, thank you, but I actually come from an English-speaking country. It's the first language I learned." And she was like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess that would explain it then." And I said, "Well, it sounds like you had a bunch of good English teachers, ma'am. Best of luck to you. You're doing well, and keep it up." Then I politely left. And I saw one of the old local men, not related to her, not related to me. Saw one of the old local men looking at me like I was strange, like I did something wrong. Like he won't say something about it. "What you doing talking to one-eyed women?" He didn't bother me, though, so I didn't bother him. But the thing is, see, every time one of the local ladies had started conversations with me, it was when they heard me speaking English. And the women here are better at English than the men are. The women actually, they can tell different cultural accents, so they know I'm African American when I speak. You understand? And that's when they start up these conversations. I'm in a conservative Gulf country, and when I'm not out with my wife, not every time, but times that I was not out or before I was even married, there will be times when they would start up these conversations. It probably happen about twice a year. It's fairly rare, but it would happen. Nobody attractive in Black America was going to start up a conversation with me without some other man's kids. Matter of fact, they usually still wouldn't do it if they were attractive. And that's what a lot of brothers go through, unless, of course, they dope boys. That's the funny thing about it. Maurice was right, and they want to help him out. Maurice was the one that got gaslighted to a certain extent. Not sisters. That's what's really happening with it. But at least we're discussing it. At least we are. Now we're going to have to tell everybody else, because we're going to move abroad. Let's get that straight. If you're going to survive, you're going to leave, because America's going to try to either absorb us or kill us off. They're going to do it. They're not going to let us stay as distinct as we are at this point. It's not their game. So that being said, this is what they're going to be doing. That's how they are. So you want to survive, you step out. You go off the plantation, off the reservation, because they reserved it for you. But as we go abroad, we need to say, and brothers, this is where we come in. We need to say with one unified voice to pretty much anybody where we go. Our attitude towards your people is based on your attitude towards our phenotype. You may prefer yourselves in marriage over us, that's fine. But if we find out that you got that white supremacist mindset where, you're in the middle, the white folks are above you and we're below you, even if it's just in terms of marriage and beauty, we're done. We're done. Because if you put yourself first, that's normal. But how dare you put the oppressor first and put us last? That's a reasonable thing to say to people. They will understand. I know the Malays understand it. I can speak for them. So if we're going abroad, let's be sure that let's make this part very clear to them. Let's make it very clear. And even I will say here, if a man's issue with black women is their blackness, F him, he's not a human being. If his issue with African American women is an attitude, I can't argue with this dude. But if his issue with black women is that they are black, that they are dark, and that's what makes them ugly, then F this nigga. Because not one of them would ever say this about a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. They may not marry her because she's not one of their own, but they'll sit up and tell you that it's so beautiful. Blonde hair and blue eyes, they love it. Blonde hair and green eyes. So, and that's why I say to them, look, if you think that the European woman is better looking than the Arab woman, and that The black woman is the least beautiful in the world. You have the same racist white supremacist mindset. It is not a personal preference. It is white supremacy, and it is what everybody else around the world says and everyone else in your culture. Don't say it's a personal preference. Your culture's like this. That's backwards and racist. If you prefer your own women over everybody else, then that's normal. That's when you start talking about personal preferences. So don't let people twist you up on that on a global scale. Because globally speaking, non-black women, see, it's not black men that are sitting up and saying, well, it's just my personal preference. I like them light skinned, and they lying, because most black men ain't really saying that. Most black men actually are pretty much all across the spectrum. We are pretty much evenly distributed when it comes to these preferences. But see, sisters ain't talking about it. They're saying that we're not the ones that are evenly distributed. That's because it is the men from other countries that are not evenly distributed. They are on one accord. They hold white beauty standards up even above their own women, and they hold the African phenotype down. That's it. So what sisters are blaming us black men for is actually true about non-black, non-white men around the world. That's where the truth is. And that's legitimate, and that's when we have a right to say, no, see, you are giving her less than her due credit simply because she's black, and that's racism. And because she's the opposite of white. Oh, we don't hate black people. You don't have to. If you think that white folks are our equals, you got a goddamn problem. If you think white folks are better than yourself, that's the proof. I think I've said enough. Thank you for being patient. The blackest man on social media signing black off. Black male power just because they don't like it.